Welcome back, everyone, to the final installment of the Jason Kunen series. We had 3 other great videos that I hope you guys check out. And while you're here, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And today's episode, we're going to kind of close it off with a topic that I believe is very important for anyone, whether you have a positive mindset or negative mindset. But before we get into that, Mr. Jason Kunen, please introduce yourself and also tell them why I'm such a good friend.
Well, I think that'd have to be a separate video. That'd be sort of maybe next week's session. But hi, everyone. I'm Jason Kunen. I'm a philosophy and religious studies teacher, and I have background in philosophy, meditation, and psychology. And Keith and I have been close friends for a long time. And today we're going to be talking about letting go and what that means exactly.
Let it go. Oh, I hope that didn't get copyrighted.
I mean, I think the best way to start is, well, if we're going to talk about letting go, we should actually start with what do we have? Seems like a natural place to start of, okay, what exactly is it that we're letting go? So, here's a sort of a question that I present to some of my more advanced students, which is, have we ever taken into account that we have a mechanism, an interpretation mechanism that allows us to interpret our experiences and everything that's happening around us, and that it's so fast that it makes it seem as though what is appearing to me in my thought is reality, is real. In other words, to break down the question, what is anything but the projection that we put on it? We appropriate the world to ourselves. And then what happens? Well, we think the way we see something is the way it is. And if we want to talk about letting go, I think that's where we have to start. Here's sort of a philosophical question that a lot of people have been talking about, and you see on philosophy posts is, how do we know if we're living in a simulation, something like that, or the Matrix. And, here's, here's my response is something to the effect of, well, the Matrix of the simulation isn't out there, it's in here. And it's this interpretation mechanism of the mind that I think connects back to our first episode of this series, that if we're not aware that we have a matrix, we have an interpretation mechanism, we have an operating system, a mental operating software, if you will, that is operating all the time and is interpreting all of my experiences. It's the source of my thinking, it's the source of my reactions, it's the source of all my narratives. This is, I think, sort of the real secret, is the real key, is, we've been talking about, okay, being caught up in your narrative, but all of our narratives are being used by this interpretation mechanism and how we process reality. So we're getting into some deep philosophical stuff here.
Yeah.
It's not just a matter of, right, sort of the sort of like a toxic positivity of I'm just going to change my story or change my narrative. It's learning to change, the very way that we process the world and we process reality. And how is it that we process reality? I mean, basically, we take ourselves at the center. I'm here, and everything else is there, and we objectify everything. We see everything as an object and has its own separate ID tag. Not realizing that actually everything is interwoven. Again, if we know how to see it, if we have the vision for it. When we talk about letting go, it can start with, okay, becoming aware of my thoughts, becoming aware of my emotions, learning how to let go of these sort of unwholesome, thoughts or unwholesome emotions. Even the narrative that we may tell about ourselves of, okay, woe is me type of attitude. Okay, learning to let go of that narrative. But then there's the very interpretation mechanism of the mind itself that likes to objectify everything and put things in its own box according to these preferences and prejudices, that's where I think the highest aim of human transformation is, which I'll admit is pretty idealistic, but I think it's possible. And I think it's what our great wisdom teachers have been calling us to do.
Yep. Because it's like understanding that like you have everything you need right now to do whatever it is you want to do, because everything you want to do starts with you. Are you going to put the time into figuring out how to do something, how to find something, how to pay for something? Is there something that you really have a goal towards, or is it an actual goal, or is it just a dream? You know, do you fantasize about it, or do you actually put in work to try to make that dream into a reality? And going back to our last video of understanding positive emotions, it could be something so small. You know, it could be something like, you know, I want to afford a car, you know, which to some people is a very big goal to have. You know, I want to afford a mansion. I want to be able to make my own hours. Getting to that, though, is getting a little more into our last video, which you should definitely check out if you want to kind of understand a little more of the power of positivity. But for this video in letting go, do you believe that someone can really like fully let go, or do you believe that even in the process of training the body and mind to really understand what we have, what we're letting go, and what we could do with the bits and pieces that are going to be left behind no matter what we do?
I think letting go itself is both a skill and something that we work up to, something that we practice. So, you know, learning to let go of, let's say, negative thoughts, or learning to you know, let go of, you know, certain unwholesome emotions, or maybe unwholesome ways that we express our emotions, you know, is a practice of learning to let go of certain narratives. Mm-hmm. And here's what I mean by that, to make it a little less abstract is, okay, let's say, you know, tons of people are on dating apps now, right? And, you know, people, you know, trying to match with someone, and, you know, maybe someone's having a rough time, and they create this narrative, oh, you know, maybe I'm not worthy of love, or I'm not, you know, I'm not good enough, and all this sorts of things. And, you know, I think there's first, right, the recognition of that's a story that we're telling ourselves, right? And you know, I think the ultimate insight here is that the things that we see in the world, right, the way we see things is not the way things are, but we buy into it. We identify with that story. We identify with that narrative, which is why it's so hard to let go of. And I think we can let go of it. I mean, this is, you know, the aim of things like cognitive behavioral therapy, which, you know, have their roots in mindfulness, which is, how do you learn to, you know, challenge your cycle of negative thinking and emotions by looking at the evidence you have for them. So if someone has, for instance, which, let me just clarify, I am not a licensed psychologist, I am not a licensed psychiatrist. This is my understanding and you know, what I've learned, what I've read. If someone has something like social anxiety, right, and feels as though, okay, other people are judging me, you know, when I'm in a social situation or something like that, right? You know, maybe the therapist would ask something like, okay, you know, how, you know, do you have evidence to demonstrate that that's really true, right? What evidence can you offer to show that that's really concrete, right? And the whole point really is to try and get that person to challenge that story that they're telling themselves as a way to let go. The more we learn to let go of those narratives, the more we actually become free. I don't know where this came from, but in a conversation I had with a student one time, I said something to the effect of, when you let go of who, you know, you think you're supposed to be, you become free to be who you are.
And do you think that those like little bits and pieces of that like stay with us, or do you think like we can like fully let go of them?
I'm of the opinion that we can learn to let go of them. I mean, but again, yeah, I want to make a distinction here between letting go and forgetting, right? You know, we don't forget those experiences, right? I mean, maybe we went through some hardships in childhood, or even the love experience, right? But so we have a memory of that, but we learn not to identify with a narrative that we have about that memory. And I think that's the point. So I'm of the opinion, and again, perhaps I'm an idealist, that we can learn to let go of some of these narratives that can hold us back.
Yep, I think you kind of said it perfectly. It's when you start tying your identity to an experience, to a state of being that you believed you're in, then that's going to be how these types of situations, these types of occurrences and events will latch on to you. You know, it's like, Keith Hoy, oh, I'm a YouTuber for motivational videos. I'm a real estate agent. And little things you say about yourself, you know, when it's like, oh, I have back pain every day, and it's hard for me to walk, and I'm not very active. Then yeah, that's who you are. You know, saying that you have these things just continues to reinforce it. And eventually when you're like, oh, well, how is, you know, letting go of who I am going to really change who I am? Because that's all I know.
Certainly, we've been talking about this as sort of a positive thing, as something that, you know, improves the style and quality of life, but that certainly doesn't mean it's easy, right? Because, you know, if we've identified with a narrative for most of our life, or our whole life, then suddenly learning to question it, learning to challenge it, it's incredibly scary, right? And you know, it creates these questions. Okay, well, where do I find meaning, right? Who am I, right? These are, you know, really scary questions to think about if someone hasn't really done that before, or stepped into those waters before. So, you know, I think it's important to, you know, have sources of meaning in your life, whether going back to your series on Viktor Frankl, you know, finding some kind of work or deed, right, that gives us meaning, or, you know, relationships that are really important to us, or learning how to, you know, make sense of sort of our attitude towards adversity and challenges. The biggest fear I think people have of letting go is that they let, you know, I'm going to lose myself. And in one sense, yes, you do lose yourself. But in losing yourself, I think you gain a new self that is holistic and has a wider perspective of life too.
Once you change, you start to be this different person, then you start to find different avenues that you really want to go into. Like, and I think I talked about this in that video that I did for Viktor Frankl in one of them, because it was a series. But in that, it's really seeking this new form of identity that aligns with who you've now become. You know, if you're very positive, let's say you're more active, are there like sports teams, like, you know, adult sports teams, or things you could join, like, to bring that sense of community? I always say volunteer work is always like a big deal, because that's always something that's going to better the community, and you're usually surrounding yourself with people who also want to better the community. Then I think after that, Jason, and you can kind of go off this, letting it just kind of take off, right? Like, once you find this new self, once you've let go and you've learned to let go, you start filling the void with all of these positive things, to the point where you've forgotten about that former self who spent 4 or 5 hours causing problems at the grocery store. And now you're like, I don't have time to cause problems here. Like, you know, I'm moving. I know I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to enjoy like a nice coffee when I get home, have a glass of wine before bed. Like, finding the power to open up yourself once you've changed and let go.
That's right. You know, and it is a powerful experience, because I think the more that we learn to let go of these narratives of ourselves, the more our life actually, I think, tends to focus towards others and towards helping others. And I mean, you know, whether it's the Buddhist concept, right, of loving kindness and generating compassion for others, or, you know, the Hindu idea, right, in the school of Vedanta, where like recognizing that the divine is within everyone, right? Or whether it's, we look at the Judeo-Christian traditions, you know, and all the Abrahamic traditions, right? And recognizing that other people are children of God, or, you know, even secular, you know, traditions or philosophical traditions, right? In my opinion, there's no coincidence that the golden rule appears in virtually every tradition across the planet. And I think they converge in their understanding that our that the direction to move towards wholeness as a human being, includes taking care of others, right? And alleviating the suffering of other people, taking care of other people. And I think that comes about actually when we learn to let go of a mindset and an interpretation mechanism that focuses on me, first of all, and letting go of the idea of seeing other people as an object, right? Seeing other people as though they're over there. Because once you see someone as over there, if we see others in the world through our series of labels and titles that we give things, it dehumanizes them. So there's something important about learning to let go of those narratives we have of ourselves and other people. We can actually start to see people as they are. And I'm connected to this person, right? The other's a sacred being. So the skill and ability and process of letting go, I think, changes us and, has the power to transform our habits and behaviors, into someone who, is not dispassionate or uncaring or apathetic of the world, right? Letting go is not apathy and saying, I'm just going to move off to the mountains, or I'm just going to not care about other people. I think it really transforms us into, I'm not so as caught up in myself. It's one of these things that I think is really hard to explain, or even maybe it's really even hard to understand unless someone's really practiced this. Maybe it's possible. I'm sure it's possible. That movement is something that really is experiential, is, the more you actually practice it and really experiment with, okay, let me experiment. What happens if I let go of this narrative? What's going to happen, right? And learning to take that leap into that uncertainty, I think you'll discover some really interesting insights and about yourself and about your relationships and how we function in the world.
Yeah, I feel like this whole series, this Jason Kunen series, I feel like if you followed it from start to now, then you really understand the core of what we're talking about and the practice of how to really use the state of controlling your emotions, understanding your emotions, how to use your emotions, and then training the mind in ways that kind of move forward from the emotional state to really say, okay, these are my emotions. Now, here's what I know, here's what I understand, and here's how I'm going to use all that I've learned to change that. And it's going to take time. It's going to take practice. And Jason, do you think there's anything like simple or maybe like a daily trick that someone can kind of do to kind of reinforce their ability to let go of either something within themselves or someone else?
Very, very simple things, right? Maybe there's something that this sort of comes from, the long tradition of contemplatives, East and West, right? Is why would people go off into the forest or into the desert or into the mountains and, give up, these things that would be, a lot more comfortable for them, right? And a lot more pleasurable. And, it's, because sometimes when we learn to give these things up, we learn to challenge the habit we tend to have of grasping, mental grasping towards things. Why do we grasp towards things? Because we think that something's going to give us that validation. It'll complete us somehow, but it always falls short. So, maybe taking something, right? I mean, this is a concept, right, in a way behind giving something up for Lent, right? Is let me choose something and let me see what would happen if I set something aside, right? And, it could be your phone, right? I'm not gonna be around my phone or technology for 24 hours and see what happens. Or say, you know what, this weekend is coming up, 24 hours in silence, right? No book, no phone, right? What do you do, right? It's scary. And those are maybe harder things, but maybe there are small things that we can find that we can give up. Or, every time I end up snacking before lunch and dinner, right? What happens if I give that up? Let me practice that. And it's in those moments of practice that we can start to realize, wait, I didn't actually need that. and we can sort of build up from there. What we're seeing now in the culture is this habit of grasping. Is a lot of people's sources of meaning have either been questioned or taken away, or people have struggled where to find it. And I think, whether it's a political ideology or whether it's some other movement, a lot of people, attach their identity to something because it's certain, it's safe, it reinforces an idea of self. At this point, I'm sure all your viewers are anyone familiar with some of the Eastern traditions probably identified that I've been heavily influenced by Buddhism and Hinduism. But, I think there is something important in learning to say, is this really my identity? Which is not to say, let me give this up, but, I think the reaction that people tend to have in our culture, against for one movement, against another, right? Or, oh, you do stand for this, or do you stand for that? And it's sort of this polarity. I think the way I see it is it's this problem of we don't have any sort of deeper sources of meaning, and so we attach our identity to that. And it's because that we do that we're seeing some issues in the culture. And so, what I think is, if we learn to practice the skill of letting go, we can hold on to those views, certainly, but we realize, if my identity is tied up with something and you hold a different point of view, how are we going to enter into dialogue? It's going to be ego-log, it's going to be monologue. We're going to be talking past each other because anything you say is going to be direct attack on my identity. And I think raising the question is, can I cross worlds? Can I hold the space for someone else and see how they're seeing it, which in a sense requires, let me create a little distance between me and sort of what I take to be my identity. And the more you practice that, you realize, wow, I could cross worlds. I could go into somebody else's point of view, even if I completely disagree with them, but I understand where they're coming from. And so for me, I think this sort of goes beyond just sort of, here's some way to improve, my own individual life, but here's sort of one technique to help sort of heal the culture and sort of start to bring humankind together.
The more we could do that, the more we bring about that in our lives, the more that it spreads to other people that we know, and it's going to just continue to spread more and more and more to the point where it's going to become less predominant, that people are going to judge others that quickly and not be able to transverse worlds, as you said. And the more we're going to come to an understanding of really what type of world we can create with the power of our minds. A lot to think about, which is why we focus on ourselves and the people around us, your world, if that's to say. So I think that about wraps up this series. So Jason, thank you so much again for joining. This was really awesome. I'm sure this won't be the last time you're on this channel. We always have so much to talk about. So would you like to give any closing thoughts or anything to wrap up, to share with the audience that has watched all these videos? If you haven't already, check them out.
Yeah, check out the series. I've also have a YouTube channel that's sort of been untouched, but there's at least a basic breathing meditation practice there, and another lecture or two that I've done at a conference that sort of relates to some of the ideas that we've done. But Keith is doing you're doing some great work here, so everybody should like and subscribe. I don't know where the buttons are. Somewhere
on here. Yeah.
Somewhere on here.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again, Jason. And for all of you out there, we will see you on the next video. Have a good day.